Cheers. Hi. Welcome, Charles. Take a seat. Charles, it's so wonderful to have you here. The two clips of the films we just screened, the two trailers, are both screening at the festival. And they're screening for a very good reason. Killer of Sheep, well, you saw all the accolades on the film. It's been very appreciated amongst a wide range of critics and audiences, even though the film hasn't been seen by many people yet, so go and see it again. And The Glass Shield is really important because you made that film in 1990.
1994, 5 or something like that, 3.
And it's a unique film in film history because it tells about racism within the police corps from the inside out, and it's still urgent and relevant. How would you describe making that film back then and perceiving all this social uproars around police brutality today?
Well, it seems as though it could be filmed today, but the problem is that it never ended. I mean, the police brutality, the militarization of the police department, it's an ongoing thing. I mean, now you know more about it because there's video cameras, there's cell phones and things like that that can capture and document what's going on. Before things like that happened, and they were dismissed because the police had so much authority and everyone believed them. And like people were getting killed, beat up and arrested all the time. In fact, Johnny Cochran's, who defended O.J. Simpson, his first case came out of a situation where an innocent person, a black person, was in his car with his family, and a policeman just, stopped him for no particular reason. He had his gun out, and he shot the man in the chest, and there wasn't any altercation or anything, but the police said that the car lurched forward and his gun went off accidentally. And he was never convicted or charged with any crime, even though he went to court when Johnny Cochran, it was his first case. I don't remember, I don't think he won the case. But anyway, it was something that, and everything in the film was based on a factual incident that happened. And it hasn't changed. It's gotten worse in many ways.
And it also goes back to your first film, Killer of Sheep. That was a student film, actually.
It was my thesis film at UCLA.
A thesis film of, yeah. And because that also was, I think, 8 years after the first uproar in Watts because of police brutality.
Yeah, it was, I actually started shooting the film I wrote it in the early 70s, like 72. I was supposed to be finished with it then. And so the riots took place in 65, the first ones, the Watts riot. So it wasn't too long after that. And these are the people that would have been involved in the riots, young teenagers and things like that.
And what was the reason for you to make this film?
Well, it was a response to, we spoke about Birth of a Nation and things like that, and most of us who got in film school at that time, we wanted to write our own stories, and sort of correct the sort of narrative and distortions that Hollywood had produced and continued to produce about people of color. And I was working, I was involved in a political group at UCLA, and we're making films about, the working class and exploitation and things like that. But the problem was that they were always the same film, always the same outcome and the same prescription about, exploitation was generally thought of as, shop workers, factory workers being exploited, and you form a union and everything is happy after that. But in my community, it wasn't like that. I mean, people endured. They were happy to get a job. It was difficult, but it wasn't as simple as forming a union. There was all sorts of other issues that they had to be concerned about. And so I wanted to make a film that didn't say what I would do, but would be shown in the community for discussion where you would say, this is what it looks like in the community. Now, how would you deal with it? And that was the idea behind the film. And also, the idea was to bring filmmaking to the community and introduce filmmaking to young kids, because most of the people that, well, I had a small crew. I had myself and someone else, Charles Bracey, who was a cameraman. But you know, the little kids in the film worked on the film. They did sound and stuff like that. They operated the Nagra, and you know, helped with the slates and cables and stuff like that.
Wow. So it was literally a community film.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. The time where you made this film, you were a student at UCLA, together with June Giovanni mentioned already some of the filmmakers. Haile Gerima was there. Go and see the work of Haile Gerima, Julie Dash, of course, Larry Clark, and so many great filmmakers. And there was this wave of amazing films that most of the people hardly were able to see. They were screened at the IFFR Museum in Amsterdam some time ago. Some of them are released on DVD or Blu-ray. But you were part of a very tight group that was named the LA Rebellion at UCLA. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I first went to UCLA, there was only a few of us there in the film department, and in the 60s. I was in the 60s. It was myself and maybe two other people of color. And it wasn't until the 70s that a number of black students started to appear. And it wasn't, and mainly because Eliseo Taylor, who was a teacher there, one of the first black teachers there, who created this program called Film and Social Change and Ethno Communications. And out of that, I mean, he brought in a number of different groups, Native Americans, Asians, and black Hispanics. And I taught one of the classes, and it was all to encourage people who couldn't get into the department, but they got into the department this way, and they were to make films, not entertaining films, Hollywood films, but it had to be about their community. And so you had that element, and then you had the war in Vietnam, which sort of politicized the department. And then he brought in third world cinema, which gave us a sense of what we should be doing as well. I mean, the possibilities of what film can do, you know. So all of those things came together during that period. Plus we had, again, a number of black people and people of color who began to talk about what is our purpose here. I mean, what kind of films are we supposed to be making, you know? And we had discussions all the time, and at the time we never had an idea that it was going to be this LA rebellion. I mean, we were rebelling against the films like Birth of a Nation, the kind of films Hollywood was making about us. But at the time, I mean, we had no means of distributing the film or exhibiting the films or finding money to make films, you know. So that's why we stayed at UCLA for so long. That's why I got kicked out, because, you know, there was no place to go, you know. So I just stayed until they said you have to go. You know? And but it was not until later, you know, in the 90s or something like that, where it became possible for students can go to film school, maybe come out and make a film in the studio system. But before that, we never thought we were going to be making films as a living or a means to survive. You know, I thought I'd just be making it on doing things on the weekend and had a job to support my habit. But the idea was to make films that we can sort of take in the community and talk about, you know, what we can do, you know.
And now, when you look back at it, it's amazing because you see there's a very distinct thematical commonality between all of you, but also aesthetically. And it's a tremendously important historic work, I think, that whole body of work. And what I find also interesting, I remember Haile Gerima saying, I think it's in the book about the LA Rebellion, about how hard it was to convince people of the black reality, for instance, the other white students. Was that also an issue with, for instance, Glass Shield, to have people understand how the reality of violence committed on black male predominantly was so rampant, was so reoccurring?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things was after the film was made, I remember we screened it in San Francisco, and excuse me, some critic, a newspaper person, saw the film, and he wrote this awful article about the film, you know, saying that, you know, I had distorted the police and their act, you know, what they do and all that sort of thing like that. Police don't act like that, you know. And I don't know where this guy came from or what his background was, but obviously he had no connection with the police department or people in the community. He thought everything was fabricated and you know, it's hard to talk to people like that. If they don't have you know, the experience, you know, it's just talking to a wall, you know? And so, I mean, it was obvious to us who lived in the community what was going on. It was even worse, you know, in many ways. But for someone to come up and say, well, no, what you're telling is a falsehood, you know, it's kind of painful in a way. Because you see the distance between people. I mean, you know, I'm sure people who've been to America would say that, or looked around, it is segregated. I mean, there are lines and parts of the city that it's predominantly one race, you know, and there's very little interaction, you know. I mean, Hispanics and Black live in the community, but that's where the most diverse or exchange is. But in the rest of the country, I mean, it's just, you know, either wall-to-wall white or black, whatever it is, you know. And so there's very little sympathy or empathy in a way. That's why this whole I think about when, I mean, Black Lives Matter. I mean, you find that there's this distance, you know, that some white people seem to share. I mean, that why are you talking about Black Lives Matter? Doesn't all lives matter and things like that? Well, Black Lives Matter includes that. But we're talking about all this brutality that we're suffering continuously, and no one says anything. And you act like Black lives don't matter. That's basically what we're saying, you know. And does that mean I'm done?
Yes.
With the music?
Although
I mean,
there's one more question I would like to ask you. So I'm sorry, Ennio, it's not.
I'm sorry. I mean, it's like the Academy Awards, you know.
It
when
is.
the music come on, they just get the hook and pull you off. Jesus, I mean, I didn't know I was talking that long. I mean.
Yes, it's not his fault. Actually, it's mine because it's in the schedule. But go ahead, Charles. Go on.
I know I lost
You
my
were talking
thought.
about the Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's something that we sort of like. It was always a part of our existence, you know. And you know, when you look at Birth of a Nation and the Ku Klux Klans, it should have. I mean, it was apparent then, you know. And by the way, I remember seeing that clip you showed about D.W. Griffith and I think it was Walter Houston. Whatever it was, Walter Houston. Or, I forget the other guy who was interviewing him. You know, I saw that on TCM, and thank God for TCM played that whole tape. You know, and I was shocked at the fact that the guy sat up there in a tuxedo and said the Ku Klux. He said his mother sewed sheets for the Ku Klux Klans, and it was necessary. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And Lillian Gish was asked later on, what does she think of it? And she said, well, it's, you know, things happen, whatever it is. She didn't want to say or say anything negative or whatever it's about. Or didn't understand that. By the way, I don't know if you know anything about Reconstruction, but I mean, that was the biggest lie. That when that picture and that story about blacks in the Senate and the House and Congress, things like that. Reconstruction in America was like 1867 or something like that on for about 10 years. It was one of the most progressive periods in American history. I mean, public schools, banks and things like that, and integrated unions and things like in the South that happened. And then Andrew Johnson screwed up everything, and you know, but it was really I mean, if that had lasted, America wouldn't be the same today. So I mean, that's how tragic Birth of a Nation is in depicting that.
Okay, so we really have to watch our leaders. That's an important thing. There's one final question I want to ask you because I know you have very specific ideas about that. As filmmakers, and I think there's a lot of filmmakers here in the room, why is it so important to really learn the profession?
Well, I think for a number of reasons. One, because if you're a person of color, you're not going to get the same. It's not going to be the same budget. It's going to be a great deal less. And so you have to do a lot more with less, you know. And someone's always challenging you about, can you make a film? When you look, for example, in The Glass Shield, we had to reshoot something because of the end was, I shot it in a way where the character was over the top of it. So I wanted to tone it down. So I had to shoot that very last scene. And so we had this, Miramax sent this PA, a person who was working for the company to sort of like be there. And so I'm working on directing the scene, and she comes up and she wants to direct the scene. I said, well, no, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you do it this way? And she was only there because I allowed her to be there. And I had to tell the producer, I said, look, she's in the way. She's acting like I can't do this. She's just out of film school, right? And so you say, look, where do you get the idea that you have this privilege, this understanding that, I mean, if this was Scorsese or Oliver Stone, he would have told you to get the heck out of here, you know? You wouldn't have even approached that, wouldn't even thought about that. But this attitude that you can come and tell me how to direct a film, you know? Oh, and by the way, that trailer is so misrepresenting of
That's what
the film. I just wanted to get to that point before we change anything else.
Yes.
I mean, I remember we were going to, we took the film around to do a test screening, Miramax, and we went to this theater in New Jersey, and they had people fighting in the lines because, you know, it was one of these like, young people things, you know. And then, and I said to Harvey Weinstein, I said, this isn't the crowd for the film. I mean, we want the film to show everyone, but this isn't the particular crowd, you know. And after, you know, there's music in the film, and Ice Cube. They wanted a film that's going to be about Ice Cube. And Ice Cube is just a cameo part in it, you know. And so, he's a very great person to work with, very classy, and he knows his lines, he's professional, but he brings baggage to the film in a sense that everyone thinks it's going to be a rap film or things like that. So Miramax wanted to change the language of the film, make it more, you know, racy.
A hood film.
Yeah, and have guns in the, I said, no, it's not about that. So we got in this big fight, you know, and so I see now that when the trailers, first time I saw this trailer, and it's all about, you know, action, and it's supposed to be a subtle attempt that's trying to show you how people are seduced by corruption, you know, and how an innocent person can get.
And now it looks like a cop movie.
Yeah, it looks like.
Movie. Yeah.
I think this is the real thing this time, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Charles,
I'm sorry,
for being with us. Thank you. Thank you.